Good day, fellow adventurer, and welcome. My name is CEO Matt, and today I will be covering the most voted for class for my 7th Pathfinder 2nd Edition class overview, the Sorcerer. Pathfinder 1st Edition Sorcerer was certainly a mixed bag. It was feared for having the most spells per day out of any class, but it lagged behind the Wizard and Witch in terms of spell levels, and as such, was never regarded in that top rung of classes. Also, due to the very limited amount of spells known, the Sorcerer's utility was quite limited. They didn't have the breadth of choices that the Wizard or any Divine caster had access to, and as such, could definitely feel underwhelming if in a situation where they couldn't shine. Additionally, because of the Sorcerer's very limited selection of spells, they had to use the ones that they would get the most mileage out of, most notably, blasts. As such, the Sorcerer was often relegated to that role, for their debuffs outside of Color Spray were oftentimes useless. However, the Sorcerer was quite adept at handing out buffs, once again thanks to the number of spells they had per day. The Sorcerer's unique class feature in Pathfinder 1st Edition was their bloodline, a source of additional power where they would acquire more spells, as well as gaining unique powers as they would level up. The extra spells that they would learn would come at every odd level, which was a bit disappointing, as they gained access to new spell levels at even levels. Having to wait an extra level to get the spell was always very unfortunate, as there were some real winners in there that you would have to wait to acquire. The Sorcerer needed a way to stand out from the other arcane casters. It very much felt like a second thought to most, as the other arcane casters seemed to do whatever a Sorcerer could do, but better. The Sorcerer was definitely in need of a change, and Paizo certainly delivered in this regard. The Sorcerer's initial proficiencies, to no one's surprise, are incredibly lackluster. Only the Wizard has fewer weapon proficiencies, and their armor is the same, in that they are both only trained in unarmored defense. In addition, the Sorcerer is also tied with the Wizard for the lowest class hit points, at a meager 6 per level. The Sorcerer is trained with all simple weapons, but they will have better things to do than use any of them. Their saving throws are standard fare for casters, being trained in fortitude and reflex saves, and experts in will saves. Unlike the Bard, the other charisma-based caster, the Sorcerer is only trained in perception. The Sorcerer's skills are also quite paltry, getting 2 skills dictated by their bloodline, one of which always being their spellcasting tradition, in addition to 2 more skills plus their intelligence modifier. 4 skills trained might seem like a good starting amount, but with no inclination to invest in intelligence, this is probably going to stay around this number. Because of their limited skill training, it is important to make sure that you are getting the most out of them. Thanks to the Sorcerer's naturally high charisma, being the party face is their first and foremost job when filling out a party's roles. Unfortunately, because of the Sorcerer's lack of skill training, that is the only role that they will fill outside of combat. Inside of combat, the role is heavily dependent on their choice of bloodline. Speaking of which, the Sorcerer's bloodline now comes with a new effect. Not only does it impact the Sorcerer's bonus spells known, but it also affects which spellcasting tradition the Sorcerer has access to. Yes, that means that the Sorcerer no longer remains in the Wizard's shadow. They can now imitate any casting class in the game. A primal Sorcerer will fill in the blasting role with a large amount of offensive spells at their disposal, whereas an occult Sorcerer will take on a debuffing role, thanks to the amount of mental and incapacitation spells in their repertoire. The Divine Sorcerer will most likely act in a supporting role with access to heal and other restorative magic, while an Arcane Sorcerer can fill basically any other role in the game, with a diverse selection of spells to choose from. At first level, the Sorcerer must select their choice of bloodline, the source of where their power is derived. I will go into more detail about this at a later point in the video. The Sorcerer is a spontaneous caster, which means that they do not have to prepare specific spells in their slots. However, this also means that they only have a few spells known, and cannot freely heighten their spells. The spell repertoire consists of 1 spell known per spell slot of any given level, one of which being their bloodline spell. For instance, a first level Sorcerer with the Undead bloodline would know 5 cantrips, one of which being Chill Touch, and 3 first level spells, one of which being Harm. In order to remedy the lack of free heightening, the Sorcerer gains signature spells every time they gain access to a new level of spellcasting, and this allows them to freely heighten that spell. As I previously mentioned, they do not have a specific casting tradition. This is based on their bloodline. Though casters are not known for amazing proficiency progression, the Sorcerer is tied with the Wizard for having the weakest. The first save to increase is Fortitude at 5th level, followed by Reflex at 9th. Their Perception increases to Expert at 11th level, and Will Save increases to Master at 17th. Additionally, their skill increases and skill feats progress at the same rate as all other classes, bar the Rogue. Skill feats are earned at all even levels, and skill increases occur at every odd level except for first. The rest of the Sorcerer's progression is the same as other casters. They gain expert proficiency with simple weapons at 11th level, and become experts in unarmored defense at 13th. Their spellcasting progression increases to expert at 7th level, master at 15th, and legendary at 19th. There are currently 10 bloodlines to choose from, as of the writing of this class overview. Each presents the sorcerer with the spellcasting tradition, training in that respective skill, and training in another skill relevant to the bloodline. Each bloodline also comes with a list of granted spells. Upon reaching the designated level, the sorcerer adds that spell to their spell repertoire. Bloodline spells come in the form of focus spells, and the sorcerer automatically comes equipped with the initial bloodline spell and a focus pool containing 1 focus point. Class feats can be used to unlock the advanced and greater versions of bloodline spells. Finally, blood magic is a sorcerer ability that procs whenever you cast one of your bloodline spells from either your focus pool or via your spell slots, and can give the sorcerer extra bonuses such as to damage, skills, or saving throws. The skills you should be training as a sorcerer are very straightforward. Diplomacy, deception, and intimidation are almost requisite to be a party face. Unfortunately, depending on what bloodline you selected, this might leave you with only 1 or 2 additional skills left to choose from. As such, there really isn't a lot of wiggle room for a sorcerer, and your out-of-combat experience might feel a bit dull if there is no one to talk to. To make matters worse, because sorcerers do not gain any direct benefits out of investment into intelligence and wisdom, coupled with their poor perception progression, there really aren't a lot of roles that the sorcerer can adeptly fill. If it so happens that you have an extra skill point lying around and are not sure where to put it, medicine is always a good choice, as is society. The sorcerer is a caster, and as such does not gain access to a first level class feat. To add insult to injury, they don't even have a class feature that would allow them to gain a first level class feat either. That is quite the shame, as they have quite a few solid options here. Dangerous Sorcery gives a nice bonus to damage dealing spells, which scales as you cast higher level spells. The Sorcerer also has the ability to take a familiar, just like the Alchemist, Druid, and Wizard. I've already explained in each of those videos how amazing a familiar can be, both in and out of combat, so if you want a refresher, please check out the videos in the description. Sorcerers also gain access to Counterspell as a class feat, but because it requires you to either have Dispel Magic or the relevant spell in your repertoire, this is highly situational. The Sorcerer also has access to both first level meta magic feats, Reach and Widen. Blessed Blood is a very recent addition to the Sorcerer's class feats, allowing one to select their deity's signature spells as part of their repertoire when reaching the appropriate level. It should be known that these spells are not automatically added to their repertoire, and the Sorcerer can pick and choose which spells they'd like to add. The Sorcerer is tied with the Bard in having the most eclectic amount of class feats to select from at later levels, thanks to their breadth of bloodline options. The most exciting of these come at 4th level, where the Sorcerer can select an evolution feat based on their bloodline. The Arcane Evolution allows the Sorcerer to act as a pseudo-wizard, gaining access to their spellbook. During their daily preparations, the Sorcerer can prepare a spell that is in their book but not in their repertoire. Alternatively, they can select one spell in their spellbook that is already in their repertoire as an additional signature spell. The Divine Evolution is much more straightforward. The Sorcerer gains an additional spell slot at their highest level of casting, which can only be used to cast Heal or Harm. These spells can be cast whether or not they are already in your spell repertoire. Similarly, the Primal Evolution grants the Sorcerer an additional spell slot at their highest level, which can only be used to cast Summon Animal or Summon Plants and Fungi. Again, neither of these spells are required to be in your repertoire in order to cast them. The Occult Evolution gives the Sorcerer training in the skill of their choice, and due to the lack of skill training the Sorcerer receives naturally, can be an excellent boon to diversify your talents outside of combat. It also gives you a once per day benefit of choosing an occult spell with a mental descriptor, don't worry, there are plenty of them, and adding it to your spell repertoire after spending 1 minute. This lasts until the next time you make your daily preparations. Other solid options include Advanced Bloodline, which allows you to learn the next focus spell down the line, as well as adding an extra point to your focus pool, and Bloodline Resistance, which gives a +1 status bonus to saving throws versus spells and magical effects. Sorcerers are spontaneous casters, and as such, only have access to a small assortment of spells from the spellcasting tradition. The number of spells a sorcerer knows at any given level is equal to the number of spell slots they have at that level. The first spell known at any given level is going to be their bloodline spell. This cannot be changed or swapped out through retraining or other means. For cantrips, the sorcerer only gets 5, one of which is automatically determined by their bloodline. Detect Magic and Read Aura are, of course, staples, and getting the former from the Imperial bloodline can certainly be helpful. Offensive cantrips, such as Acid Splash and Produce Flame, can be acquired from the Demonic, Diabolic, and Elemental bloodlines, though Electric Arc cannot be. Dedicating 2 cantrip slots to blasts will leave the sorcerer with very little wiggle room otherwise, so be sure that you are content with these before selecting your bloodline. Shield is another fantastic cantrip to have, and the Draconic bloodline comes with it. For those of you without special eyes, the Light cantrip can certainly be a blessing, courtesy of the Angelic bloodline. Spells known will vary greatly based on the bloodline you select. At any given level of spellcasting except 10th, the sorcerer will have 4 spells known, one of which being the bloodline spell. As a result, it is incredibly important to select spells that you know will be of use. Situational spells that might see occasional use should be skipped in favor of spells that can have general utility in any given situation. At each level, a safe rule of thumb is to have 1 blast, 1 debuff or buff, 1 area control, and 1 utility spell in your repertoire. With regards to heightening, it is important to consider that the sorcerer will only be able to freely heighten 1 spell per level, thanks to their signature spell ability, gained at 3rd level. Therefore, having spells that are useful without heightening should be taken into consideration when selecting your spells known. The sorcerer's key ability score is Charisma, and as such will oftentimes be selected as the party's face. Because of their short list of skills known, they will struggle filling in additional roles. The sorcerer's role, or roles, in combat will often be dictated by their bloodline. The Arcane Spell List has the widest variety of options, and gives the sorcerer much more potential as a versatile caster. However, due to the limited number of spell slots available, one will have to be incredibly diligent about the spells being added to their repertoire. Generally speaking, 1 blast, 1 buff, and 1 debuff or area control spell per spell slot per level will oftentimes be sufficient. The other 3 traditions are much more straightforward. Divine has support options, Occult has buffing and debuffing, and Primal has area control and blasting. The Sorcerer, being a charisma-based caster, will often receive a lot of comparisons to the other one, the Bard. Just looking at a glance, the Bard has much stronger proficiencies in their weapons, armor, and saving throws, not to mention their higher hit points and skill training either. Though the Sorcerer will have more spells per day than the Bard's strengths lie in their composition spells and cantrips. As such, the Bard makes for a much more effective buffer and debuffer than the Sorcerer ever could. That being said, the Sorcerer does have a notable advantage over the Bard, number of spells known. At every level greater than 1st, the Sorcerer will have an extra spell known in their repertoire, which is the Sorcerer's Saving Grace. With respect to Druids in the primal spellcasting tradition, the Sorcerer will need to be able to go first in order to make use of their wall spells for area control, or be able to soften targets with their strong blasts. However, the Druid advances their perception much more quickly and also casts off of Wisdom. The Storm Druid also has access to Tempest Surge, the best blasting focus spell in the game. It should be noted that the Sorcerer does receive more spells per day than the Druid, which can be a massive selling point if combats are short and resources do not need to be conserved. As such, an extra fireball can really make the difference in any given encounter. If the Sorcerer chooses a Divine Bloodline, they will be competing with the Cleric for the position of team support. The Cleric's key ability score is Wisdom, which once again puts it ahead of the Sorcerer. Having access to a stronger start will make it much easier for the Cleric to appropriately use their spells, instead of having to use Heal as a reaction to incoming damage. To make matters worse, the Cleric is also not lacking in the spells per day department either. With Divine Font and 14 Charisma at level 1, the Cleric actually will have more spells per day than the Sorcerer will up until 7th level, at which point they break even, assuming the Cleric chooses to boost their Charisma at 5th level. The Sorcerer does pull ahead at 9th, but goes back to even at 10th, assuming another boost to Charisma. From 11th level onwards, the Sorcerer will have more spells per day than the Cleric, but the Cleric's extra spells will all be at their highest level. Divine Evolution closes this gap much earlier, but the sheer amount of healing that the Cleric gets clearly keeps them above the Sorcerer in this regard. Finally, the Wizard is probably the one in closest competition for the Sorcerer in terms of a party slot. In terms of armor and hit points, the two are equal, but the Sorcerer pulls ahead ever so slightly with weapons. However, the Wizard easily removes the Sorcerer's primary selling point in number of spells per day. In fact, the Wizard actually comes out ahead in terms of spells per day once you factor in their Arcane Bond, as well as their extra cantrip from Arcane Skull. The Wizard, thanks to their high intelligence score, will naturally receive more skill training than the Sorcerer, allowing them to diversify themselves out of combat. And speaking of diversity, the amount of spells that the Wizard can know will cleanly trounce the Sorcerers, assuming they gain even a bit of downtime to learn additional spells. The Sorcerer will be naturally better at social interactions than the Wizard could ever hope to be, but the Wizard will be better at just about everything else. All things considered, the Sorcerer's niche is just too concentrated to give them an edge over the Wizard. This first build displays how effective the Sorcerer acts as a blaster. Ignis was born with the Elemental Bloodline, and uses the Primal Bloodline to its fullest effect. With natural ambition, he can take dangerous sorcery at first level, giving him extra damage behind his blasts. Versatile Heritage gives him the ability to take incredible initiative, giving him an extra opportunity to strike hard and fast. Though he focuses on fire, having other types of damage available is always essential, and Electric Arc is fantastic. The second character, Benji, shows off a more subtle way of utilizing the primal spell list. Instead of focusing on blasts, they use the other aspects that the tradition provides, in this case, healing and summoning. Additionally, with the Fey bloodline, they gain access to quite a few spells not normally seen on the primal spell list, such as Charm and Hideous Laughter. They took a familiar through their ancestry and will upgrade it as soon as they can at 2nd level. Their skills, to nobody's surprise, focus on charisma-based abilities with an emphasis on deception. They tend to stay back in combat, tossing out a Ray of Frost, but can also use Intimidation to debuff enemies. This final build attempts to do something unorthodox, taking the Sorcerer into melee. Before you get mad at me for presenting 2 humans, Alara plays much differently than Ignis. Given that she has the blood of a dragon inside of her, she focuses on slashing with her claws. She makes sure that she casts Mage Armor at the beginning of any adventuring day to keep her AC at a reasonable standard, and goes in with her claws courtesy of her focus pool. Shield is essential to ensure that her AC remains high, and can also be used to mitigate damage in a pinch. True Strike is there to proc blood magic, and to ensure that her claws hit their target. The changes to the Sorcerer were certainly flavorful and fantastic, and I love how Paizo revamped this class. What I don't love about the class is how it basically falls short in regards to all the other casters in terms of ability and potential. When comparing the Sorcerer to other casters in the role that they should fill, they simply do not stack up. Even as the face of the party, the Sorcerer still falls a bit short when comparing themselves to the Bard, and even to the Rogue. The Bard has more skill training and can allocate the resources into each of the charisma-based skills, while the Sorcerer will often have to settle for 2 of the 3, unless their bloodline gives them access to one of them, though many do, or will have to spend a feat for more skill training. With respect to the Rogue, they have skill feats to spare, and will be able to easily outpace anything the Sorcerer attempts to do without magic. The Scoundrel can also take Charisma as their key ability score, so they can even remain on pace in terms of ability score progression. All things being considered, I am not saying that the Sorcerer is a bad class. They are absolutely fantastic in the role they fit into. They just aren't the best at it. However, they have a wide variety of options at character creation that no other class can really boast. With 10 different options for Bloodlines, which will increase when more books are released, the Sorcerer has more than plenty of ways to be played. My only regret is that once this Bloodline is chosen, their playstyle is incredibly limited due to their small selection of spells, as well as the lack of skill training and poor progression in their proficiencies. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for additional content. I plan on releasing 1 video of this type every month until I've covered every class, so do stay tuned. I currently do not have plans on doing these videos in any sort of order, but I will be posting the next class poll on my Discord channel and on Twitter, which can be both found in the description. And of course, have a great day.